New York, a state rich with the stories of a nation that began long before European explorers discovered its mighty rivers. A land of stunning peaks and colorful valleys, home to writers, presidents, and prisoners. It was here where a crafty inventor first brought photography to millions. And innovation harnessed a raging river to power America's first city of light. On New York soil, revolutionary soldiers fought to forge America's independence. And an elite corps of cadets still learns how to defend the country's freedom. It's here where one of America's greatest fortunes was built on the ferries that ply these waters. And daring workers keep Manhattan moving. Aerial New York tells the stories of the city's tallest spires and the hallowed ground of its fallen towers. This is the Empire State. The story of New York State begins with an incredible gift of nature. More than 10,000 years ago, a torrent of melting glacial ice carved through upstate New York and created Niagara Falls. Every second, 3,000 tons of water surge over the falls, making them the most powerful in North America. Water has played a defining role in New York State ever since the beginning. From the breathtaking power of the Niagara to the waterways where America's Empire State began. Long before its skyscrapers, a Native American tribe called the Lenape used to hunt and fish on the island and shores of Manhattan. They called it Mannahatta, meaning the island of many hills. It was also an island of meadows, ancient forests, black bears, and bald eagles. In 1624, the Lenape agreed to share their island with the Dutch for an exchange of goods worth 60 guilders, or what would have been about $24 at the time. But the Dutch considered it a sale and soon took control of the island. Some of the Lenape's ancient footpaths have become New York City streets, and 843 acres of their former land is now one of New York City's treasures. Created in 1858, Central Park covers 6% of Manhattan. It was the first landscaped park in America. But creating it wasn't easy. Some say that it took more gunpowder to blast and create Central Park's lakes, hills, and meadows than was used in the Battle of Gettysburg. A unique feature of its design was its separate pathways for horse-drawn carriages to help people quietly enjoy the park. Now, bicycle rickshaws share these old carriage routes with New York City taxis. The design of the park was originally inspired by 19th century landscape paintings, but ever since, it's been an inspiration for artists themselves. Today, a work of art is rising on the roof of one of the greatest museums in the world, the Metropolitan Museum of Art. Two artists, helped by a team of rock climbers, are assembling thousands of pieces of bamboo to create a 50-foot-high sculpture called Big Bamboo. It's designed to look like a cresting wave, perched above Central Park's treetops. This urban oasis draws 25 million visitors a year. But only the lucky ones get to enjoy views of it from their windows every day. The city's first luxury apartment building lies on the park's west side. The Dakota has been the home of famous artists for decades, including dancer Rudolf Nureyev, actress Lauren Bacall, and John Lennon. When it was built in 1884, the Dakota was surrounded by undeveloped land. Now, it's flanked by taller towers, with even more spectacular views of Central Park and the city. Building higher and higher is nothing new in Manhattan. But trying to build the highest has always been a risky proposition. Many of New York's tallest skyscrapers today were built during a period of fierce competition between developers in the early 20th century. 40 Wall Street, with its distinctive copper roof, was once the tallest building in the world when it was completed in 1930, a title it held for only a few weeks. That's because Walter Chrysler was already building his own now famous skyscraper uptown at 405 Lexington Avenue. After 40 Wall Street opened its doors, Chrysler hoisted a secretly built spire onto the top of his building's Art Deco crown, topping out 40 Wall Street by 120 feet. But Chrysler's achievement was short-lived too. Less than a year later, the new, even higher Empire State Building was completed after just 14 months of construction. The Empire State Building hasn't always been the tallest structure in Manhattan, but it is again today, after what many have called the greatest tragedy in American history. These are the footprints of the Twin Towers. On September 11, 2001, clouds of ash engulfed Lower Manhattan after terrorist attacks brought down the city's tallest buildings, the towers of the World Trade Center. It happened here at Ground Zero. Nearly 3,000 people died in the attack, including 343 firefighters. Now, the footprints of the World Trade Center are being turned into reflecting pools, memorials to those who perished. And New York City's skyline is about to change again. A new tower is rising above Ground Zero. More than 1,000 workers are building America's tallest skyscraper. It's the largest construction site in the country. One World Trade Center, also known as the Freedom Tower, will rise a symbolic 1,776 feet. This city has been reinventing itself ever since it was founded. In the 1960s, the earth excavated during the construction of the original Twin Towers was used as landfill to extend Lower Manhattan and its shores. Today, New York City has more than 600 miles of coastline and includes land on dozens of islands of all shapes and sizes. One is the historic Ellis Island. Only part of it actually lies in New York State. From 1892 to 1954, this tiny island was the gateway to America for a staggering 12 million immigrants. It's believed that 40% of Americans can trace their roots to at least one ancestor who passed through Ellis Island. Inside the famous Great Hall, new arrivals from Europe and beyond lined up to be inspected and processed. In the island's single busiest year, 1907, more than 1 million immigrants arrived here. Now, 3 million people from around the world visit the Great Hall every year as tourists. But not all of New York City's islands are places most would want to come. This is the only way for convicts to get in and out of the city's largest prison. Rikers Island is practically a borough of its own, complete with schools, a tailor shop, ball fields, and chapels. On some days, the prison population at Rikers can swell to nearly 20,000. But that's nothing compared to Manhattan. Even though it's the most densely populated county in America, 70% of its workers, or nearly 1.5 million people, still live somewhere else. Most get to work via the 8 bridges that connect Manhattan with the boroughs and beyond. The Brooklyn Bridge may be more famous, but its neighbor, the Manhattan Bridge, is one of the busiest. It links Brooklyn with Manhattan's Chinatown. This double-decker suspension bridge dates from 1909 and carries cars and trucks on both levels, as well as 4 New York City subway tracks. Maintaining the city's bridges can be a dangerous job. One misstep, and you could end up in free fall. But without its bridges and tunnels, Manhattan would only be accessible by air and water, just as it was more than 400 years ago. That's when a European explorer appeared on the horizon and set the stage for New York to be born. New York City's Verrazano Narrows Bridge. It spans the mouth of New York Bay and links the boroughs of Staten Island and Brooklyn. The bridge is named for Italian explorer Giovanni da Verrazzano, the first known European to chart these waters. In 1524, Verrazzano arrived at the mouth of the bay, but didn't sail very far inside. 85 years later, in 1609, it was an English explorer who did. Henry Hudson was mapping new trade routes for the Dutch when he discovered the Native American island of Mannahatta. Hearing of the area's rich resources, Dutch traders quickly followed and called their new settlement New Amsterdam. But in 1664, the British conquered the area and renamed New Amsterdam, New York. When a group of Dutch settlers arrived in 1624, they landed on this island. They were hoping to trade for beaver pelts with the Native American tribes that lived upriver. The Dutch called the place Island of Nuts because of its plentiful chestnut trees. But the British later renamed it Governor's Island. Remains of the earliest settlements here are long gone, but forts have survived. The oldest one is the star-shaped Fort Jay, which lies on the site of earthwork fortifications that were built to defend New York against the British during the American Revolution. But those fortifications were a miserable defense, and the British took control of the island after the Battle of Brooklyn in 1776, one of the largest battles of the war. In the early 1900s, Governor's Island was enlarged by more than 100 acres, with landfill from the construction of New York City's subway system. After mapping Mannahatta and the surrounding shores, Henry Hudson set out up this mighty waterway, which would later bear his name. Just 10 miles north of the city, he arrived here, at one of the widest points on the river. It's called Tappan Zee. Tappan was the name of a nearby Native American village. Zee is Dutch for sea. When Henry Hudson saw that the river widened, he was convinced that he had found a new passage to Asia. But then, the waters narrowed again just a few miles north, and Hudson's search continued. Today, a 3.1-mile-long bridge crosses Tappan Zee, linking communities on the West Bank with Tarrytown to the east. It's the site of famous tales of a headless horseman and a man who slept for 100 years. Writer Washington Irving lived out the last years of his life here in Tarrytown, after having created the famous characters Ichabod Crane and Rip Van Winkle. In honor of Irving's tale, the village of North Tarrytown renamed itself Sleepy Hollow in 1996. The Headless Horseman Bridge is gone, but this one leads to the old Dutch church where Ichabod Crane was chased by the ghost in Irving's tale. Irving is buried in this cemetery. It's also the resting ground of major American industrialists Andrew Carnegie, Walter P. Chrysler, and William Rockefeller, who all chose the banks of the Hudson River as their final resting place. But not everyone on the Hudson is here by choice. Just 6 miles north of Tarrytown lies the notorious Sing Sing Prison. It's home to more than 1,500 convicts. Its name comes from Sing Sing, a Native American phrase that means a place of small stones. Convict laborers built the prison's original cell block in 1825. Since then, serial killers, Russian spies, and Charles Lucky Luciano, who some called the father of organized crime, have all done time here. But Sing Sing itself has a checkered past too. Early prisoners were forced to live and labor in absolute silence, and those who broke the rules were brutally punished. It also used to be home to the state's notorious electric chair. In the 1938 film Angels with Dirty Faces, James Cagney's character, Rocky Sullivan, was executed at Sing Sing. The last real criminal to be put to death here was a 34-year-old convict named Eddie Mays in 1963. Since then, New York became one of only 16 states to ban capital punishment, though Sing Sing's reputation still inspires fear. When Henry Hudson first discovered this river, he called it the River of Mountains. Just 100 miles north of New York City lies one of the most beautiful landscapes in North America. A stunning range of peaks speckled with forests, rivers, and lakes. These are the Catskill Mountains. And they literally keep New York City alive. 100% of the city's drinking water comes from watersheds like this one. And to ensure its continued supply, the city has purchased more than 100,000 acres of land upstate, making it one of the largest landowners here. Water from lakes and streams feed into underground aqueducts that carry fresh drinking water down to the city. Many locals don't even know where these giant underground pipes lie. To the east, the Hudson River is a lifeline for ships and barges carrying cargo from New York City to Albany. But its seemingly quiet waters hold hidden dangers. Mudflats can ground a vessel and its million-dollar cargo in seconds. But one obstacle in the river is a welcome sight to pilots: the Esopus Meadows Light. There's been a lighthouse on this spot since 1839. The light was later closed after ice flows damaged its foundation. But citizens banded together to save this historic site. Today, the Esopus Meadows Light is the only surviving clapboard lighthouse on the Hudson. A bald eagle at the river's shore searches for prey. Once on the verge of extinction, America's national bird has made a comeback. But the fish they catch in the Hudson could be more of a threat than food. For 30 years, until 1977, the General Electric Company pumped as much as 1.3 million pounds of toxic compounds called PCBs directly into the river from its manufacturing plants upstream. Luckily, New York City's watershed in the nearby Catskills wasn't affected. But fish, birds, and other species along the Hudson have been found to contain dangerous levels of toxins that could cause cancer in people too. It's why the state banned fishing on huge stretches of the Hudson for almost 2 decades. Environmentalists and fishermen rallied to save the river's ecosystem. They formed Riverkeeper, which grew into one of the fastest growing and most successful environmental organizations of all time. In 2002, their work finally paid off. General Electric agreed to dredge 800 Olympic-sized swimming pools worth of PCBs from the river. Work has begun, but no one knows how long the cleanup will last, and if the river will continue to be a potential threat to offspring of eagles like these. North of Sing Sing, the Black Knights of the Hudson are preparing for battle inside the oldest occupied military post in America. West Point sits high above the river, overlooking a narrow bend. George Washington once considered it to be the most strategic military site in the country. American soldiers at West Point once controlled river traffic here using a 150-foot-long iron chain strung across the river to stop ships. The West Point Military Academy was established in 1802 by President Thomas Jefferson. Cadets come from all 50 states and can only register if they agree to abide by a strict 4-point honor code. Not to lie, steal, cheat, or tolerate anyone who does. Competition is nothing new to the banks of the Hudson River. One of America's wealthiest fortunes was built on it. Frederick Vanderbilt commissioned this estate in Hyde Park in 1895 on 211 acres. But the wealth he used to build it came from a fortune first earned by his grandfather on the waters of the Hudson. It was here off Manhattan that America's once richest man, Cornelius Vanderbilt, got his start as a small-time ferry operator. He's said to have bought his first ferry with a loan of $100 in 1810, and then beat out his competitors, including his own father, one by one. By the 1840s, Vanderbilt was the largest employer in the United States, and soon bought up railroads and shipping companies that reached all the way to California. Modern ferries still ply Vanderbilt's old routes. Today, the Staten Island ferry carries 21 million passengers a year. Vanderbilt's old rail line on the Hudson is still in operation. In Vanderbilt's day, his train steamed right along the river and into the city down 10th Avenue on street-level tracks. At the time, this busy street was nicknamed Death Avenue due to the number of train-related fatalities. It's why every train traveling through the city had to be led by a man on horseback to warn residents of its approach. In the 1930s, the original tracks were replaced with elevated ones to increase safety. Now, they've been transformed into the High Line. It's a suspended ribbon of walkways and native plants that weaves its way down the city's west side. Thousands use it every day. Today, green space in New York is also sky high. The second tallest building in New York City is also its greenest skyscraper. Insulated floor-to-ceiling glass walls and a rainwater collection system have helped enable the Bank of America Tower to to become the first skyscraper in the world to receive Platinum LEED status, the highest green building rating possible today. Green skyscrapers are the latest addition to New York's rich architectural heritage. But many of the state's most unique structures require a trip upstate. The banks of New York's Hudson River can best be explored by air. A two-seater helicopter lifts off over the valley. Below, the houses and estates of some of America's most illustrious names. John D. Rockefeller, once America's richest man, built this 6-story stone house called Kykuit in Sleepy Hollow, turning profits from Standard Oil into a palatial 3,500-acre estate. It lies on one of the highest points on the river. Rockefeller designed much of Kykuit's gardens himself. The house now belongs to the National Trust for Historic Preservation. This is believed to be one of only 2 domed octagonal residences in the world. The Armour Steiner House in Irvington. In 1859, a New York financier named Paul J. Armour built this 8-sided country residence. It was believed that an 8-sided house would have twice as much sunlight in its rooms as a 4-sided one. Later, a prominent tea importer named Joseph Steiner bought the house and added its most distinctive forms, a colorful domed roof and cupola. After Steiner, residents included a Finnish writer and a poet. In 1976, the house had fallen into disrepair, and the National Trust for Historic Preservation stepped in to rescue it from demolition. Now restored, it's part of the Hudson Valley's unique architectural heritage and is as visually stunning from the ground as it is from the air. But architects aren't the only ones who have made their mark on the landscape. This is said to be one of the largest works of art in North America. And there's no better way to enjoy it than from above. It used to be an abandoned bluestone quarry, until a local sculptor named Harvey Fite bought the site in 1938. Inspired by ancient Mayan art, he set to work on a sculpture he called Opus 40, since he expected it to take 40 years to complete. It's a work of passion and patience. Employing the techniques of ancient Egyptian builders, Fite hoisted and pieced together giant individual slabs of the quarry's bluestone to create a sculpture of multi-level curved terraces and ramps. He also built a house to live in right next to the quarry. Sadly, Fite died here in 1976 from an accidental rockfall, just 3 years short of his goal. But even incomplete, Opus 40 remains one of New York State's artistic treasures. "50 miles to the southeast, another piece of the Hudson River Valley has been transformed into art space. These rolling hills used to be farmland until 500,000 concertgoers descended on them in August 1969 for what's been called the greatest musical event of all time, Woodstock. Performances by Jimi Hendrix, Janis Joplin, and the Grateful Dead drew so many concertgoers that New York State Governor Nelson Rockefeller used the National Guard to airlift in supplies. 35 years after the historic event, the site of the concert was turned into the Bethel Woods Center for the Arts. Today, its amphitheater holds 15,000 people, just 3% of the attendance at Woodstock. Original Woodstock musicians including Crosby, Stills and Nash have returned to play here. In New York State, freedom has always been hard fought and won. Some of the most important battles in the American Revolutionary War took place on New York soil. An obelisk in the town of Victory celebrates two of the biggest. It was here in the fall of 1777 where British forces surrendered in the battles of Saratoga. Afterwards, France finally recognized the independence of America and entered the war as its ally. Three of the obelisk's four sides hold statues that honor the generals that led the American advance: Horatio Gates, Daniel Morgan, and Philip Schuyler. Schuyler lived nearby in this farmhouse. During the war, British troops occupied the site and burned his original house to the ground. But after the war, Schuyler later salvaged what he could and rebuilt his farmhouse in just 29 days. Saratoga lies on the Hudson River, but Henry Hudson never made it this far north. His last stop was a place on the river now known as Albany, the New York State capital. Dutch fur traders first established a settlement here in 1614. Today, Albany is the second oldest chartered city in the United States. At the city center lies the Empire State Plaza, home to the more than 10,000 employees that run the state, as well as the State Library and Museum. Governor Nelson Rockefeller is said to have first sketched the original plan for the plaza on the back of a postcard. Its $2 billion price tag, marble facade, and stark design have drawn criticism ever since it was finished in 1979. Upstate New York has long been a popular haunt for weekenders, but its forests are also home to those seeking more permanent solitude. Unless you're looking from the air, it would be hard to know that they're even here. This is a place called New Skeet. 3 separate but united communities live in this picturesque setting. New Skeet was originally started in 1966 when a small group of monks broke away from the Franciscan Brotherhood and formed their own monastery. 3 years later, 8 nuns followed, establishing their own practice nearby. Later, a few married couples arrived and formed a third religious community in the area. New Skeet broke away from the Roman Catholic Church in 1979 and is now part of the Orthodox Church. Each day revolves around intense monastic practice. With its abundant forests and streams, finding sites for peaceful contemplation in New York State has never been hard. If Henry Hudson hadn't turned back at Albany in 1609 and had followed the Hudson River to its source, he would have ended up here. This is the largest area of protected wilderness in the continental United States. The Adirondack Park covers 6.1 million acres, 1/5 of New York State. It's nearly 8 times the size of California's Yosemite. Unlike most mountain ranges, the Adirondacks are not strung out in a chain. Instead, they're formed as a giant dome, 160 miles wide. This region was once flat, but 5 million years ago, giant forces from below pushed up rock and soil, creating the Adirondacks' peaks and valleys. They are almost as impenetrable today as they were 400 years ago. The Adirondack Park's lakes and streams are some of the country's hidden treasures, but one is well known around the world. Lake Placid was the site of one of the greatest events in American sports history. It was here, during the Winter Olympics in 1980, when the U.S. hockey team, made up largely of amateur players, beat the Soviets in what's been called the Miracle on Ice. Deep in these mountains, the headwaters of the Hudson River were discovered in 1872. But by then, it was another waterway to the west that was about to power the cities and towns of New York State. Ancient trails once crossed the Mohawk River Valley in upstate New York. This was the land of the Iroquois Confederacy, a group of Native American nations that inhabited the valley's rich forests and hills. Stretching from the Hudson River all the way to Canada, its rivers and ancient footpaths became a major route for the fur trade. By the early 1600s, the popularity of hats made from beaver fur were driving the beaver to near extinction in Europe. Fur traders set off for the New World, which still had large numbers of beaver, especially here in upstate New York and further north in Canada. Access to the Mohawks' rivers and trails were paramount, and conflicts over trade routes flared among the tribes and between the British and French. In 1758, a British general named John Stanwix established a fort on this site in what is today Rome, New York. Fort Stanwix was built to control an important 6-mile land route connecting the Mohawk River and nearby Woods Creek. The Oneida hoped the fort would bring peace between their tribe and the pioneers. But the British abandoned Fort Stanwix just 3 years after completion. And in 1777, an American Revolutionary force successfully defended the fort against attack by British and Iroquois troops. Half a century later, Rome became the site of the biggest construction project in the state's history. A man-made waterway that would replace the Mohawk Valley's ancient trading routes and turn former trading posts into boom towns. The 363-mile-long Erie Canal follows New York's Mohawk Valley and links the Hudson River with a string of towns to the west, all the way to the port of Buffalo on Lake Erie. Today, locks in the canal still help ships move upriver, just as they did almost 2 centuries ago. When it was finished in 1825, after 7 years of digging, cargo could travel on a single ship from New York City to America's Great Lakes, right through the state for the first time. The going is just as slow today as it was then. But the canal's route through the Mohawk Valley is as scenic as it gets, as it approaches Rochester. Today, the Rochester metropolitan area has the second largest economy in the state, and part of the canal still runs right through downtown. The arrival of this waterway in 1820 caused the city's population to double in just 10 years. With mills turning out more flour than any other place in America, Rochester became America's first boomtown and was nicknamed the Young Lion of the West. Ever since, the city has been known for its broad avenues, elegant homes, and famous citizens. Abolitionist and women's rights leader Susan B. Anthony lived in this humble red house on 17 Madison Street, where she was once arrested for trying to vote in the 1872 presidential election. Anthony died here in 1906, just 14 years before the 19th Amendment guaranteed women the right to vote. Across town, these well-tended gardens once belonged to a man whose name and company are synonymous with Rochester. In 1884, long before he made the fortune he needed to build this mansion, a scrappy inventor named George Eastman patented the first mechanism that held rolls of paper film. He and his mother came up with a new name for the company, Eastman Kodak. At the time, photography required big cameras, heavy glass plates, and messy chemicals. Kodak film rolls and cameras brought picture-taking to the masses and helped turn Rochester into the imaging capital of the world. Bausch & Lomb and Xerox, two other imaging giants, were also founded in and around the city. Today, the digital age has reduced Kodak's fortunes, but the company's headquarters are still right in downtown. The Erie Canal isn't the only waterway flowing into Rochester, New York. Water from the Genesee River once powered the city's mills. It's the longest river that flows north in the Western Hemisphere, on its way to Lake Ontario. Before it arrives in Rochester, the Genesee flows through Letchworth State Park. It's been called the Grand Canyon of the East. In 1852, the Erie Railroad Company built a bridge across the river, just above Upper Falls. The old Portage Bridge was called the highest wooden bridge in the world before it was destroyed by fire in 1875. The bridge that replaced it is made of steel and is still used by trains today. Gorges and waterfalls line the river, but they're no comparison to New York State's most famous natural wonder. Niagara Falls. The falls straddle the border of the U.S. and Canada in the northwest corner of New York State. There are two main falls. Horseshoe Falls, which is primarily on the Canadian side of the border, and the American Falls in New York. When glacial waters carved up this land and created the falls, they were 7 miles downstream. But over time, the raging water has eroded the rock below, and the falls have been inching their way upriver ever since. Many a daredevil has been tempted to test their power. The first to survive the falls was a woman named Annie Taylor in 1901. On her 63rd birthday, she climbed inside a wooden barrel and, clinging to her heart-shaped pillow, disappeared over the American Falls. Taylor managed to survive the more than 70-foot drop with just a few bruises. Others haven't been as lucky. Water from the falls generates 280 tons of force on the rocks below, enough to power 2 giant hydroelectric plants that siphon water off the river. They're the biggest generators of electricity in New York State, churning out millions of kilowatts of power that's shared between the U.S. and Canada. Harnessing power from the Niagara River is nothing new. In 1759, a Frenchman named Daniel Joncaire constructed a small canal above the falls to run his sawmill. More than a century later, new mill owners expanded the canals, and in 1881, Niagara Falls became the site of the country's first large-scale hydroelectric power station. J.P. Morgan and the Vanderbilts invested, and electric power soon lit up mills and towns all around the river. Nearby Buffalo, New York became the first city in America to have electric streetlights, earning its nickname, the City of Light. Today, Buffalo is New York State's second largest city, and most of its power still comes from Niagara Falls. New York from the air, a land of ancient trails and rivers, where industry flourishes and bald eagles thrive. From the battlefields of revolutionary soldiers, across the spires of the country's tallest towers, and waters that have fueled one of America's most famous fortunes. To see New York from the air is a chance to discover its people, bridges, waterways, and the skyscrapers and natural wonders that make New York the Empire State.